Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our daily Torah, 10-minute Torah power. We're going to learn today the fifth reading of this week's portion of Beshalach. In the Chumash, it's on page 515, chapter 16. Well, verse 27 of chapter 15. Okay.
4:15. You said 5:15.
I'm sorry, 4:15.
You got it.
All right. Then, this is now, the Jewish people are now after they crossed the sea, the great miracles happened, they saw God, and they sang the famous song, Az Yashir, as we say every day in our prayers, and here's where we are. Then, on one year, about a week later, they journeyed and came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water corresponding to the 12 tribes, and 70 date palms corresponding to the 70 elders. They encamped by the water for 10 days. On the 11th of Iyar, 10 days later that is, they moved from Elim and camped on the east shore of the Sea of Reeds. On the 12th of Iyar, a day later, they journeyed from this stop and camped somewhere in the deserts, in the Sin desert. On the 13th of Iyar, the next day, they journeyed from this stop and camped at Dafka, another location in the Sin desert. So they made a bunch of stops on their way to Mount Sinai. They stayed there for 2 days. The entire community of Israel came to Alush, another location in the Sin desert, which is between Elim and Mount Sinai, on the Sabbath, the 15th of Iyar, which is the second month after they had left Egypt. So now they're the 15th of Iyar, exactly a month after they left Egypt, they find themselves in this place. That morning, they finished the bread they had taken with them from Egypt. If you remember, they went out of Egypt with matzahs, right? They couldn't do the leaven or rice and so on. So that matzah lasted them for a month. Having eaten 2 meals a day, this was the 61st meal they ate from these provisions. Although they were not yet hungry and there was still ample time for God to provide them with food, the entire community of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron because they were in the desert with no provisions left. They didn't know where they were going to get the next meal, right? They ran out of food. What's the plan? So they started complaining. The Israelites said to them, to Moses and Aaron that is, if only we had died at the hand of God in Egypt, when we sat by the flesh tops and ate, the flesh pots, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, but you have taken us out to this desert to starve this entire congregation to death. It would be better if we died there, they're saying. This was the 4th time the people challenged God's ability to come to their aid. God said to Moses, the people asked for meat and bread. Today in the late afternoon I will send them quails to eat. And tomorrow I'm going to rain down bread for you from the sky. So the quails is the meat. The people will go out and gather each day's portion on that day. They must not save any from They must not save any from one day for the next. So that's the way the manna worked. Every day you went out in the morning and collected that day's ration for the day. And you were not allowed to leave over for the next day. This way I will test them as to whether or not they will follow my teaching regarding the bread. In other words, that they neither leave any of it over nor gather it on the Sabbath, as I will soon instruct them. So this was again a test. The test if they will remain, they'll do what Hashem says to them. Now, it's an interesting thing when it comes to the manna. It's a lesson that we can learn from this as well for ourselves. Every person likes to have a little reserve, right? Something, savings for a rainy day. What God is trying to tell the Jewish people over here is He wants them to be dependent on Him every single day. He wants them to to think about God every day and to be reliant on Him, that He is the provider. So Hashem says you're going to get your daily ration. You're not going to have it tomorrow. You don't put away. This way you think about me and you're relying only on me. This is something that's not easy when you think about it. It's not easy to be constantly wondering where your next paycheck is coming from, or your success, or whatever it may be. But God sometimes wants it that way. We see it as a negative, but God sees it as a positive. Because when it doesn't rain for you when it doesn't, when you don't have an excess, you're very dependent on God, and therefore God's in your consciousness all the time. And that's what Hashem wants with us. He wants a relationship that's constant. And that's the faith that the Jewish people have. It'll all be good. But that's a relationship with God. That's a constant daily reminder. And that's what we learned, we took from the manna, the daily manna that fell. This went on for 40 years. On the 6th day of the week, they must prepare what they bring in, and even though they will have gathered the same amount as on previous days, it will miraculously be twice as much as they gather each day. Thus, they will not have to gather it on the Sabbath. So on Friday, they'll get a double portion that will last them for Friday and Shabbos. Of course, that's where we get the Lechem Mishnah, the 2 challahs that we have on our bread, on our table every Friday night, to remind us of the miracle of every Friday in the desert when a double portion of manna was present in the desert for them, and that for that one day they were able to store for the next day. As for how to respond to the people, where am I now?
Yes.
As how to respond to the people, God first addressed the impertinent tone of their complaint. He had both Moses and Aaron deal with this, since both of them were responsible for teaching the people how to believe and trust in God. Thus, both Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites in God's name, "You said that we took you out of Egypt, and since we cannot provide you in the desert, you assume that you will perish. Your faith in God needs to be strengthened. Furthermore, asking for meat was unnecessary and impudent. You can survive quite well without it. You need meat. And anyway, you have plenty of cattle. Go slaughter meat and go and make yourself meat. What's the problem? Therefore, in the evening you will recognize that it is God, not us," meaning Moses and Aaron, "who took you out of Egypt. For you will see Him provide you miraculously with the meat you crave. But He will express His displeasure with your impertinence by giving you meat at dusk, when it is difficult to gather and prepare." So this is a request that they made that wasn't proper, so God made it a little uncomfortable in the way He answered them. On the other hand, he continues, implicit in your complaint against our inability to provide for you is your awareness of God, that God can provide for you. And this is praiseworthy. Furthermore, this very belief in God is what prompted you to ask for bread, which is justified. A person needs bread, since you cannot subsist without bread. So tomorrow in the morning, you will see the glory of God, His goodwill and love, as He provides you with bread. So that He will do with love. That'll do, in a good way for you. He will express His approval of your faith in Him by giving you bread in the morning, when there is ample time to gather and prepare it, and by presenting it to you protected by layers of dew above and below. This is why He will provide. This is why He will provide you with bread only tomorrow morning and not immediately. He will thus provide for you, having heard your complaints, which although you voice them against us, are not really against us, but against God. For what are we, that by your example you should incite your families and the mixed multitude to complain against us? What are we? We're just agents of Hashem. We have no power of our own. God then addressed the substance of the people's complaint. Since only Moses and not Aaron was responsible for providing for the people, God spoke through Moses alone. Moses said, "You will realize that you asked for meat impudently, and bread properly, when you see how God gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satiety in the morning. Although he will provide you with an abundance of both bread and meat, you should only eat bread to satiety, because it is gluttonous to eat meat to satiety. Interesting. He will give you bread compassionately, because God hears your complaints, but he will give you meat reproachfully, because although you direct your complaints at us, you are inciting others by your example to complain against him, meaning God, not against us. For what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against God. See, you find Moses' unbelievable humility. Who are we? What are we? He's the man that took them out of Egypt, provided to make all those miracles. I'm nothing, he says. And he meant it.
I'm trying to understand when it says to eat meat to satiety is
full till you're full.
Okay, so in other words, you should just have a little meat.
Not to fill yourself.
Yeah.
Well, you can eat bread to your full.
Yeah.
You can't eat meat to your full.
Right.
That's what Rambam said, right?
Right. Pointing to a location outside the camp, Moses said to Aaron, "Tell the entire community of the Israelites, draw near that place and stand there before God, for he has heard your complaints." And when Aaron spoke to the entire community of the Israelites, and they turned towards that place in the desert, they beheld the glory of God in a cloud. God then spoke to Moses from the cloud, saying, "I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, at dusk you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread to satiety, and then you will recognize that I am God, your God." Everyone then dispersed. That evening, the late afternoon of the Sabbath, 15 year, quails came up and covered the camp. In the morning of the following day, Sunday, the 16th of year, the people saw that there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the sun rose and the layer of dew evaporated, behold, over the surface of the desert was a thin substance that had been packed within a layer of dew above it and another layer of dew beneath it. Was exposed as if the upper layer of dew had been peeled back. It was very beautifully packed, like a sandwich. This substance has thus been protected from dirt and insects by dew both above and below. Although dew usually condenses from atmosphere, here it had unusually risen in the ground moisture. The substance had a thin crust on top and was as fine as the frost on the ground. This is the manna we're talking about now. The Israelites saw the exposed substance and said to each other, "It is a portion of food man," for they did not know what it was exactly, to call it by name. Moses said to them, "That is the bread that God has given you to eat. This is what God has commanded. Gather it according to what each man needs to eat. You must take an omer, about 2.5 liters or 2.6 quarts per head, per person, according to the number of people each man has in his tent." However, he did not tell them that Friday's portion would be double, so they would not have to gather it on Shabbat. That part he didn't tell them yet. The Israelites did what Moses told them. They gathered it, but some took more than they should have, and some less. You know how it is.
What, were they Jews or something?
Yeah. But when they measured it by the omer, they found that miraculously he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little was lacking nothing. Each man had gathered as much as he needed to eat. It was the exact amount they needed. Moses then said to them, "Let no man leave any of it over until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. That should be expected, right? And some people, Dathan and Aviram, these two troublemakers, left some of it over until morning, and it became maggoty, with worms, maggots, after having first become putrid. Moses became angry with them by saving some of it for the next day. They were challenging God's ability to come to their aid. Now for the 5th time, people gathered it each morning, each man according to what he needed to eat. And when the sun grew hot, after everyone had gathered his portion, whatever remained in the field would melt and run into streams. Deer would drink this liquid. when other nations hunted and ate these deer, they would taste the taste of the manna and realize still further how God favored the Jews. Beautiful. Let's stop over here.
So they had streams in the desert?
Of this stream, this was so much that melted that it streamed away from the desert, from the can. And deer would eat it, and then people that would eat that meat of the deer would taste the manna. The manna that's what they called it man, because the word man means what? Man who? What is this? They asked. They were going out for the first day, and that's where the name man came from. The manna had a lot of features, miraculous features. Anything you wanted it to taste like it tasted.
Yeah, it tasted like whatever you wanted to eat.
Except for a few different things that it wouldn't taste.
Yeah.
To protect pregnant women, actually. But it was a food that, the problem with this manna was that there was no waste. Whatever you took in, you digested, there was no waste. And the Jews got worried about that. What's going to happen? We're going to implode. There's no such thing that food doesn't have waste. They found everything to whatever you can complain. But the truth is, when you think about it, you put yourself in their shoes. So imagine you eat every day something that doesn't look like the thing you're tasting. Yeah. Imagine you eating cotton that tastes like ice cream, or you're eating cotton that tastes like a steak. It doesn't have the joy of a steak, right? You got to see the steak in order to enjoy it, right?
And you're putting your faith every day. You have no reserves. There's hundreds of thousands of people in the desert.
2 million.
And nothing for the morning except faith.
Well, they had cattle.
Yeah.
They had cattle, but the manna they didn't have for the next day. You know how many people live life like that today? They live from day to day, whatever.
Was the manna
Is that a
spread-
smart thing? What?
Was manna spread, like on table, or not on table, but they had to like go out far?
It says, depends who. The righteous found it right on their table. Not right on their doorstep, ready. The not so righteous had to go out and prepare it and collect. The wicked had to go out of the camp and collect and then cook it and bake it and prepare it. And it took for them it was a longer process. So the question is a good question. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow for some more.
Thank you.